Thank you for taking the time to watch this applicant tutorial. This online training will take the place of in-person trainings that have been required of city grantees in the past. This tutorial will mostly be dedicated to the Housing and Human Services NOFA application. However, agencies that are also interested in applying to other NOFAs will find some general information in the first few slides. We expect it will take about 25 minutes for you to watch this presentation. Afterwards, please feel free to email questions to the contacts listed on the last slide. During this presentation, we'll review the funding opportunities that are available at this time. We'll also discuss the changes to the Housing, Human, and Social Services application process that are new this year. We'll do an overview of the basic information required to complete your application, and we'll discuss the timeline and how to ask follow-up questions. First, the community development funding opportunities available. The following funding opportunities are open at this time. The Housing Preservation and Production NOFA includes both multifamily rental housing as well as shelters and transitional housing. There's also a NOFA for new homeownership housing development, as well as community and public facilities, and housing and human or social services. Please note that the due date is the same for all of these NOFA applications. The timeline is the same for all NOFA applications. The one exception is that there is a deadline for questions for the Housing and Human Services applications, which we'll discuss later on. Some other important dates to know are, of course, applications are due January 25th at 5 p.m. The draft rankings of the applications received will be released on March 1st. The Community Development Advisory Board will hold a public hearing on March 11th at 6 p.m. This meeting is open to the public and you're welcome to attend if you're interested. Written comments can be submitted to CDAB anytime between March 2nd to 31st. CDAB's recommendations will be available or decided April 1st or 8th, depending on schedules. This will be your earliest indication as to the amount of funding for which your program is being considered. Council will take formal action to accept the plan on April 26. This will be your confirmation about the amount of funding for which you're being awarded. And most funds will be available July 1st of 2021. However, there is one important exception. It is possible for funds to be available prior to July 1st if the application includes details about COVID-specific impacts. There is space to indicate this in your application. If you have any questions as to what is or isn't considered a COVID-specific impact, please reach out to the appropriate staff contact for your NOFA. You may have noticed, if you've already been to our website, that the layout looks a bit different. I'm going to walk you through some of those changes. First, we've combined most of our funding opportunities to include all of the funding and partnerships on one single link. You can find those here under Partnerships and Funding. In addition, we've combined all of our contract resources and requirements at a different link, which you'll find here if you are awarded a contract after submitting a successful application. For now, let's talk about the funding opportunities. You'll click on the Partnerships and Funding icon, which will open up this page. You'll see several open opportunities in the blue boxes. In order to learn more about any individual opportunity, go ahead and click on the plus sign to expand. Now we'll dive into the Housing Services and Human and/or Social Services NOFA. The remainder of this presentation is specific to this NOFA only. If your program is not related to services, you can stop watching here. So what's new in 2021? First of all, there's a combined Housing and Human Services NOFA. In the past, these were two separate applications, and you had to choose whether you're providing housing services or general human and social services. This year, whether you're applying for one or the other, you'll fill out the same application and follow the same steps. This two-part application begins with Part 1, which is a common application this year. I'll talk more about that in a moment. In general, this is a much shorter application than you've seen in the past. There are also now page limits for how much information you are expected to provide, and those page limits will be enforced. In addition, there's an optional online submission portal, so this year you'll have the option to submit your application online instead of in hard copy. So first, the combined NOFA application. There are multiple overlapping services, some unique to housing, others are specifically other human and social services that don't involve housing, but regardless, if you're providing some kind of service to people, this is the NOFA you need to apply to. You'll see some of the same goals and priorities that you've addressed in past NOFAs, and they've been incorporated into a single NOFA application for this year. The priority goals that the city has identified are to increase the access to affordable housing, reduce the number of newly homeless households, increase the likelihood that formerly homeless households will remain stably housed, increase access to affordable childcare, reduce vulnerability to homelessness other than housing, increase access to basic needs other than housing, or prolong the length of time seniors or disabled adults can remain safely in their own homes. As you can see, really, the first bullet is the goal that primarily is targeted towards those who are offering housing directly. The others are services which may or may not complement a housing program. One major difference is that you can only select one priority goal. In the past, applicants could select all that applied. However, it's very helpful for us as a funder to see where our grantees are focusing. So even though your program might address a few of these goals or they might be interrelated, you're going to have to choose which one most adequately describes the goal that you are addressing with your program. You may be wondering why we've chosen to implement a common application. We have heard from many of our community partners that many agencies are even busier than ever responding to the current public health emergency. We really appreciate all the work that you do for the most vulnerable members in our community. We want to make sure that we respect your time. In light of this, we want to do our part to make our application process as streamlined as possible. We know that many of our grantees also apply for funding through the United Way's Community Impact Fund during the same time of year. The city has therefore teamed up with the United Way of Whatcom County to make Part 1 of our application a common application with both agencies. Please note, the Community Impact Fund, whether or not you apply to one or both grants, will have no impact on your score or funding allocation. As usual, the review process will be completely separate. If applying to both, you are welcome to customize your answers for either agency. But by creating this common application, our hope is that we will remove redundancy and save your staff time. You have two submission options this year, but you do not need to submit both electronically and by mail. Please choose only one submission option. Now also keep in mind that the electronic submission is only available for Housing and Human Services NOFAs at this time. All other NOFA applications will need to be submitted in hard copy as they were in previous years. But please, even if you have applied for NOFA grants many times before, read the NOFA and the contract requirements before you decide whether or not to apply. The NOFA has been revised significantly this year and provides guidance on how to answer each question. The contract requirements is a new document. It's very brief and it's a summary of all the contract requirements that you will be subject to if you are awarded a grant. This will be a good reminder to make sure you are prepared to comply with all the terms and conditions if you are awarded the grant, especially if you are a new grantee. This is very important. We don't want there to be any surprises later on. So, to apply by mail, first read the funding announcement. Then download the appropriate application. Make sure, first of all, that you are not reusing an old application. This is a significantly different application than you've seen in the past, and most of the answers from previous years won't fit in the space available. You'll have to download two separate documents, Part 1 and Part 2. Part 1 is the common application, the same as the United Way Community Impact Fund application, and Part 2 is the City of Bellingham's addendum. Both of these documents are available on our website. Also, make sure to download the Excel Exhibits B and C and submit them along with the rest of your application. As you're doing so, make sure to use the form fields to complete the application in Word. We ask that you don't change the font or formatting, and just fill out the form in a plain text font. Do not change any formulas in Excel, and make sure you're careful of the page limits. These will be enforced in both hard copy and in electronic submissions. Then send your application via the United States Postal Service. We ask that this year you do not hand deliver applications. Make sure the application is postmarked before the due date. To submit online, go to our website, which is cob.org/hhsgrants. There you will find a hyperlink for the online submission portal. Fill out this form, and you can save your work as you come back, and come back to it later as needed. Keep in mind that each narrative answer has a limit of 1,500 characters, which is about equivalent to 250 words, or about 1/2 of a page. This might be slightly different than the page limits on each answer than the online application form. While the Word application says a maximum of 2 pages for each total section. This is roughly the same, but individual narrative lengths could differ. If you're using Word to draft your answers, make sure to check your character counts before submitting, just to make sure that your answers don't get cut off. Then upload all attachments in the proper format. You'll also need your Exhibits B, C, and other budget documents required in the NOFA. Make sure you electronically sign and submit the application before the deadline. Please know that the online submission portal will close at 5:01 p.m. on the due date, so we will not be able to accept late submissions. We highly recommend that you submit your application before the date it is due, so that if you do encounter any technical difficulties, we'll be able to help you before the due date. You'll receive a confirmation email as soon as it's received. I'll walk you through this process. So here is the link to the online submission portal from our website. After you click on it, at the bottom of each page, you will see a button you can push to save your application. Once you hit that button, a pop-up like the one here, will appear on your screen. You can copy the link to your form so that you can return to it until you want to submit, or you can enter your email address and then you'll be emailed a hyperlink where you can go ahead and resume editing and submit your application. So what's not new this year? Well, most of the basic eligibility requirements have not changed. Nonprofit and/or public agencies, including faith-based organizations, are eligible to apply. Eligibility requirements have also not changed from previous years. City funds cannot be used to replace or supplant other funding, although any program previously funded by the city is eligible for continued funding. All services must be delivered within the limits of the City of Bellingham or to city residents. Beneficiaries must be primarily from low-income households. And grantees must be willing to meet all contract requirements associated with this grant, if awarded. We have uploaded a new summary document that is a condensed version of many of the contract and funding requirements. This can be found on the Partnerships and Funding website. You should read through this document before submitting your application to make sure that the requirements and conditions of this grant will be a good fit for your organization and your current administrative capacity. For example, there are liability insurance requirements. You must track beneficiaries by race, ethnicity, and income. Signed timesheets are required for all staff that charge time to this grant. There is a composite billing rate worksheet that must be approved in advance by the city and determines how much can be charged for each employee. There are quarterly and annual reports and periodic monitoring that will be performed remotely or on site by city staff. We also ask to see your financial audits periodically or annually. And there's a funding recognition requirement in all annual reports and publications. The criteria on which your application will be scored is as follows. Population served is 25 points out of 70 total points. You'll see the weighting has changed significantly. Populations accounted previously for over 50% of the score. Now it's 35% of the total score, and the other criteria have a higher weight. Again, take the time to read the NOFA, even if you have applied many times before. Additional guidance for each question is included within. Population served is broken down into two categories: income and special needs groups. For the income category, your program must serve primarily households that earn 50% of the area median income or below. By primarily, we define that as 51% of your clients or more. In addition, your program may receive additional points if a significant portion of your clients earn below 30% of the area median income. There is also a requirement to serve at least one of the special needs groups identified in the consolidated plan. These are listed below and within the NOFA itself. An important change on this year's Housing and Human Services application is that you will not receive additional points for serving more than one special needs population. The scoring is indifferent to whether you serve one or many groups. Instead, we would like you to select only the groups that you primarily serve or focus on, if that is the case. For example, if your program only serves youth or young adults who are at risk of homelessness, please select only those two categories, even if some of your clients may also fall into one or more other categories. If your program serves a wide variety of low-income beneficiaries with no other eligibility requirement, please go ahead and select all that apply. You will notice that within the application there are actually two questions about racial equity and social justice, one in the common application and another in the city addendum. The first question, in this common application, asks about what steps your agency has taken at the organizational level. This might include something like hiring a consultant to work with your board or staff, and revising your recruitment and hiring policies. The second question is about steps you may have taken at the program level. This would include looking at outcomes data and comparing across different groups, and using that to inform your work. We do understand that programs differ greatly in their scope and the number of beneficiaries served. If you don't have an abundance of your own data, don't forget that you can use the consolidated plan itself for evidence of documented discrepancies, disparities, or needs. It is full of recent, relevant information of this type. Also, the most recent Whatcom County Community Health Assessment is another great source of data. Both reports document many examples of racial disparities and disproportionality in our community. Collaboration can mean a lot of things in different organizations or types of programs. Make sure you read through the rubric, which is published in the NOFA, to determine how this question will be scored. Some key questions you might want to think about in advance are: how will partnerships support or improve this service? How does your organization collaborate with other agencies working on similar goals? How does your agency share lessons learned or other important updates with funders in the community? Timeline and questions. One change that's new this year is that we have a policy requesting that all questions regarding the Housing and Human Services NOFA are asked before or during the Q&A session, which will be held on January 14th at 1 p.m. This is so that all applicants can benefit from the responses to the questions equally. If you have a question before January 14th, please feel free to email me at the contact information on the last slide, and I will respond promptly. However, I will be also keeping track of questions that are received and sharing the answers with all applicants during the Q&A session on the 14th. If you don't have a question, we still encourage all applicants or potential applicants to attend the Q&A session. And if a question arises during the session, there will be time to go ahead and ask that question or seek additional clarification. As I've said before, we welcome your questions. If you have questions regarding the Housing and Human Services NOFA, please contact me at kebartholomew@cob.org. If you have questions regarding any of the other NOFAs, please contact Samia Lutz. She can be reached at slklutz@cob.org. It's also fine if you want to save your questions and ask them live during the Q&A session on January 14th. This session will be recorded and available afterwards for those who are unable to attend. Thank you very much for taking the time to listen to this presentation. We look forward to receiving your applications in January.